Adrian Blackthorne discovered his wife was destroying him, and he'd been defending her brilliance for months without knowing it. The essay that ripped through London's elite circles like a blade had one target: men exactly like him. He'd argued for it in Parliament, quoted it at dinner parties, called its anonymous author the only honest voice in England. And now, standing in his study with ink-stained pages scattered at his feet, he knew the truth. She'd written every word. His wife. The woman he'd married 6 months ago and barely spoken to since. The duchess he'd assumed was decorative, dutiful, forgettable. Alara wasn't any of those things, and their marriage, the careful, bloodless arrangement that protected his title and her family, had just become a war neither of them could walk away from. Want to see how a marriage built on lies became the most dangerous alliance in England? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The contract arrived on a Tuesday. Alara Vance read it twice, standing at the window of her father's study while rain hammered the glass. 23 pages. Legal language so dense it barely qualified as English. Clauses about property, inheritance, bloodlines, social obligations, everything except the two people supposedly entering this union. She flipped to the signature line, empty, waiting. "You understand what this means," her father said behind her. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in the flat, defeated tone he'd adopted 3 years ago when the creditors started circling. "I understand perfectly." Alara set the contract on his desk without looking at him. Adrian Blackthorne gets a wife with an impeccable bloodline and no political baggage. We get enough money to keep the estate another generation. Everyone wins. Alara, don't. She held up one hand. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. A transaction. You're selling me to save the family name, and I'm agreeing because the alternative is watching you drink yourself to death while the house falls down around us. Her father's face went gray. Good. Let him feel it. He's a good man, he tried. Respected, powerful. You could do far worse. I could do far better. Alara picked up the pen, her hand steady. But we're not in a position to be selective, are we? She signed. The scratch of the nib against paper sounded like a cell door closing. 3 weeks later, she married a stranger. The wedding was exactly what she'd expected. A performance. St. James Church packed with aristocrats who smiled with their mouths and calculated with their eyes. Alara wore white because tradition demanded it, not because she felt anything resembling purity or hope. Her dress cost more than her family had spent on food in a year. Adrian Blackthorne stood at the altar like a man attending a business meeting. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that looked carved rather than born. Handsome in the way expensive things are handsome, polished, symmetrical, completely without warmth. He looked at her exactly once during the ceremony, a brief, assessing glance that catalogued and dismissed her in the same moment. "I do," he said when prompted. His voice was deep, bored. "I do," she replied. Her voice was steady. The priest pronounced them married. Adrian didn't kiss her. He nodded once, like he'd just closed a successful deal, and turned toward the crowd. The reception was worse. 300 people she didn't know, congratulating her on a future she didn't want. Adrian moved through the crowd like he was working a room, handshakes, brief conversations, the occasional laugh that never reached his eyes. He didn't introduce her, didn't seek her out, didn't acknowledge her existence except when absolutely required by etiquette. "Your husband seems very focused," one of the older duchesses said to Alara during dinner. The woman's smile was knife-sharp. "He's ambitious," Alara replied. "I'm sure that's valuable in certain contexts." "Oh, it is. Adrian Blackthorne is one of the most influential men in England. You're very fortunate." Alara took a sip of champagne that tasted like metal. "Fortunate? Yes, that's exactly the word I'd use." The duchess's smile widened. "Marriage is an adjustment, dear. You'll learn." "I've already learned," Alara thought. "I've learned exactly what I'm worth to him. And it's not much." The reception ended near midnight. Adrian found her briefly in the chaos of departing guests. "I have business in the city," he said. Not an explanation, a statement of fact. "I'll be staying at the townhouse for the next few days. The staff at Blackthorne Manor will see to your needs." Alara stared at him. "You're leaving on our wedding night." I have obligations. So do I. Apparently they don't matter. Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, maybe. Or surprise that she'd spoken at all. This marriage is a partnership, Alara, but partnership doesn't mean abandoning my responsibilities. I'll return when my schedule allows. Of course. She kept her voice flat. Wouldn't want to interrupt your schedule. He frowned slightly, like he was trying to determine if she was being sarcastic. Then he nodded, turned, and walked away. Alara watched him go. Around her, servants cleared glasses and folded linens, dismantling the illusion of celebration with efficient, practiced movements. Your Grace? One of the maids approached carefully. The carriage is ready to take you to the manor. Thank you. Alara straightened her shoulders. Let's go. The carriage ride took 2 hours. Long enough for the champagne headache to settle in. Long enough for the reality to fully land. She was Duchess Blackthorn now, property of a man who just walked away from her like she was a piece of furniture he'd purchased and no longer needed to think about. Blackthorn Manor rose out of the darkness like a monument to money and power. 3 stories of gray stone, windows blazing with light, gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a lifetime. Beautiful, cold, empty. The housekeeper met her at the door. Mrs. Carson, an older woman with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile decades ago. Your Grace, welcome to Blackthorn Manor. I've prepared the Duchess's suite, if you'll follow me. The Duchess's suite turned out to be 6 rooms of suffocating luxury, silk wallpaper, velvet curtains, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, a bed large enough to sleep 4 people. She'd be sleeping in it alone. Will you require anything else, Your Grace? Mrs. Carson asked. No, thank you. The housekeeper nodded and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Alara stood in the center of the room, still wearing her wedding dress, and felt something hard and cold crystallize in her chest. This was her life now, this house, this title, this marriage to a man who couldn't be bothered to pretend interest for even one night. Fine. If Adrian Blackthorn thought he'd married a decorative, obedient wife who'd sit quietly in his house and wait for him to remember she existed, he was about to learn otherwise. She spent the first week learning the house. Not the public rooms, those were easy, designed to impress and intimidate. She learned the servants' corridors, the back staircases, the routes that let her move through Blackthorn Manor without being seen. She learned which maids gossiped, which footmen could be trusted, which parts of the daily routine were flexible and which were set in stone. Knowledge was power. And right now, knowledge was the only power she had. Adrian returned on the 8th day. Alara was in the library when she heard his voice in the entrance hall, giving instructions to someone about his luggage. She kept reading, didn't go downstairs to greet him, didn't change clothes or check her hair, or do any of the things a proper wife was supposed to do when her husband came home. 20 minutes later, he found her. Alara! She looked up from her book. Adrian, welcome back. He stood in the doorway, studying her with that same assessing expression from the wedding. You didn't come down. You didn't ask me to. I shouldn't have to ask. And I shouldn't have to guess what you want. She marked her place in the book and set it aside. We didn't establish protocols for your comings and goings. I assumed you preferred independence. His jaw tightened slightly. I prefer a wife who understands her role. Then perhaps you should have married someone who came with an instruction manual. Alara stood, smoothing her skirt. What is my role exactly? You left on our wedding night. You've been gone for over a week. You haven't written, haven't sent word, haven't indicated that my presence or absence matters to you at all. So forgive me if I'm unclear on the expectations. Adrian stepped into the library, closing the door behind him. Lower your voice. Why? Afraid the servants will hear? They already know you abandoned your bride. I'm sure they have opinions. What happens between us is private. There's no us, Adrian. There's you, doing whatever you please. And there's me, sitting in this house like a piece of furniture you bought and forgot about. His eyes went cold. I didn't forget about you. I had business, important business that couldn't wait. More important than your marriage. Yes. He said it without hesitation. My work affects thousands of people. This marriage affects 2. The mathematics are simple. Alara felt something hot and sharp twist in her chest. How practical. How ruthlessly logical. Tell me, do you apply that same calculation to everything or just to the people who inconvenience you? You're not an inconvenience. You're my wife. Your wife who you don't speak to, don't sleep with, don't acknowledge except when etiquette demands it. She moved closer, holding his gaze. You married me for my bloodline and my family's connections. Fine. I married you for money and security. We both got what we wanted. But don't pretend this is anything more than a contract, and don't expect me to perform emotions neither of us feels. Silence stretched between them. Adrian's expression was unreadable. What do you want, Ilara? Honesty, she said. I want us to stop pretending this is a traditional marriage. You have your life. I'll have mine. We'll maintain appearances in public, fulfill our obligations, and otherwise stay out of each other's way. Agreed? He studied her for a long moment. Agreed. Good. She picked up her book. Dinner is at 8. I assume you'll be there. I will. Excellent. I'll see you then. She walked past him, out of the library, down the hall to her suite, closed the door, locked it. Then she sat at the writing desk by the window and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. She'd been thinking about this for weeks, since before the wedding, actually. Since the night she'd signed the contract and understood exactly what her life was about to become. Women like her, women born into aristocracy, raised to be ornaments and breeding stock, had no power, no voice, no way to change the system that trapped them, unless they took it. The essay began simply. On the nature of aristocratic marriage, a lady's perspective. Ilara wrote for 2 hours. Her hand cramped. The candle burned low. She didn't stop. She wrote about the marriage market, where girls were sold to the highest bidder and told to be grateful. She wrote about men who treated wives like property and called it tradition. She wrote about the suffocating weight of expectations, the way intelligence was discouraged and ambition was punished, the absolute certainty that no matter how smart or capable or strong you were, your worth was measured by your bloodline and your ability to produce heirs. She wrote the truth, all of it, raw and furious and precise. When she finished, she read it twice, changed 3 words, read it again. It was good, better than good. It was a blade wrapped in elegant prose designed to cut deep and leave scars. The question was what to do with it. Publishing under her own name was impossible. Adrian would shut it down immediately, and her reputation would be destroyed. But publishing anonymously, that had potential. London had dozens of periodicals desperate for content. Essays, opinion pieces, social commentary. If it was well written and provocative, they'd print it, especially if the author was mysterious. Ilara folded the pages carefully and tucked them into her writing desk. Tomorrow, she'd find a way to get this into the right hands. Tonight, she'd have dinner with her husband and pretend to be the obedient duchess he expected. Dinner was exactly as awful as she'd anticipated. They sat at opposite ends of a table that could seat 20, served by silent footmen who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Adrian cut his roast beef with surgical precision and answered her polite questions with single sentences. How was your business in the city? Productive? Will you be staying at the manor now? For a few days. I see. The silence between exchanges was thick enough to choke on. Halfway through the second course, Adrian set down his fork. You're angry. I'm not angry. You're something. Ilara took a sip of wine. I'm bored, Adrian. This house is beautiful and suffocating, and I have nothing to do except wait for you to decide I'm worth your time. You could involve yourself in charitable work. Most duchesses. I'm not most duchesses. Clearly. He picked up his fork again. What would you prefer to do? Think, read, write. Engage with ideas that matter. Write? He looked genuinely surprised. Write what? Essays, social commentary, analysis of the world we live in. Adrian's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. That's unconventional. So is marrying someone you don't love and pretending it's normal? The amusement vanished. Our marriage is perfectly normal for our class. Which is exactly the problem. He stared at her. You're not what I expected. Good, Ilara said. Neither are you. 3 days later, her essay appeared in the London Observer under the byline, A Lady of Quality. Ilara read it over breakfast, keeping her expression neutral while her heart hammered against her ribs. Seeing her words in print felt surreal, dangerous, exhilarating. The essay was positioned prominently on page 3, right after an editorial about trade policy and before a review of the latest theatrical production. The editors had added a brief introduction. We present here an unusual submission from an anonymous lady of aristocratic birth, offering a frank perspective on marriage and society. Readers may find her observations controversial. We find them worthy of consideration. Elara read her own words with a strange sense of dislocation. They looked different in print, sharper, more real. The aristocratic marriage is not a union of souls, but a transaction of assets. The bride brings bloodline and connections. The groom brings title and wealth. Love, if it exists at all, is incidental, a happy accident rather than the foundation. We are taught from childhood to accept this arrangement, to view marriage not as partnership but as duty. And we are told that questioning this system is ungrateful, unfeminine, improper. But what of the women who marry strangers and wake each day in gilded cages? What of the daughters sold to settle debts, the wives ignored by husbands who view them as decorative necessities? We are expected to smile, to perform contentment, to raise children and manage households while our minds atrophy from disuse and our voices go unheard. This is not marriage. This is acquisition, and it is time we named it honestly. She folded the newspaper carefully and set it beside her teacup. Interesting reading? Adrian's voice made her flinch. She hadn't heard him enter the breakfast room. Just the morning paper. She kept her tone light. There's an essay here that's rather provocative. He poured himself coffee, glancing at the newspaper. Which one? Page 3. On the nature of aristocratic marriage. The author is anonymous. Adrian picked up the paper, scanning quickly. Elara watched his face, her pulse loud in her ears. His expression didn't change. He read in silence, taking occasional sips of coffee. When he finished, he set the paper down. Interesting. You think so? The writing is sharp, the argument is well constructed. He buttered a piece of toast. Completely wrong, of course, but well constructed. Elara's fingers tightened around her teacup. Wrong how? The author treats marriage as though it should be based on emotion rather than practical considerations. That's naive. Marriage among our class has always been about alliance, property, and legacy. Pretending otherwise is childish. So you think women should simply accept being treated like livestock? Adrian looked at her, eyebrows raised. I think women of intelligence understand that marriage serves purposes beyond romantic fulfillment. The author seems to want a fairy tale. Life doesn't work that way. Maybe it should. Should and does are different things, Elara. We live in the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend her own work, to tear apart his assumptions, to make him see what he was willfully ignoring, but she couldn't, not without revealing herself. So she smiled instead. I suppose you're right. Of course I am. He returned to his breakfast, already dismissing the conversation. Elara stared at him across the table, this man she'd married, this stranger who'd just called her naive without knowing it, and felt something cold and determined settle in her chest. He thought she was wrong, thought her argument was childish and emotional and unrealistic. Fine, she'd prove him wrong, and he'd never see it coming. Over the next 3 weeks, a lady of quality published 4 more essays. Each one was sharper than the last. Each one cut deeper into the assumptions and hypocrisies of aristocratic life. Elara wrote about inheritance laws that favored sons, about women's education being limited to accomplishments rather than academics, about the unspoken rule that intelligence in women was tolerated only if it remained decorative and unthreatening. The response was immediate and explosive. The London Observer's circulation doubled. Coffee houses buzzed with debate. Drawing rooms across London divided into camps, those who agreed with the mysterious lady and those who thought she was dangerous. Adrian brought it up at dinner one evening, his tone amused. Have you been following this lady of quality situation? I've seen the essays, Elara said carefully. She's causing quite a stir. Half of Parliament thinks she should be silenced. The other half finds her entertaining. Which half are you in? Neither. He cut into his fish. I think she's brilliant. Elara nearly dropped her fork. Brilliant. The writing is exceptional. The arguments are rigorous. I don't agree with her conclusions, but I respect the mind behind them. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Whoever she is, she's one of the most intelligent political commentators in England. Elara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. You respect her even though you disagree? Of course. Disagreement doesn't negate quality. Adrian took a sip of wine. I'd very much like to know who she is. The anonymity is clever, but someone that articulate can't hide forever. Maybe she doesn't want to be found. Everyone wants recognition eventually. It's human nature. Or maybe, Elara said quietly, she knows that revealing herself would destroy everything she's trying to accomplish. Adrian frowned slightly. Why would it? Because if people knew she was a woman, a specific woman with a name and a face and a husband, they'd stop listening to her arguments and start attacking her character. Anonymity is her only protection. He considered that. You may be right. I usually am. He smiled then. Actually smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less carved from stone. You're different lately. Different how? More present. More yourself, I think. He set down his fork. I've been neglecting you. I realize that. This marriage hasn't been what either of us expected. Elara's throat tightened. No, it hasn't. I'd like to change that, if you're willing. She looked at him across the table. This man who'd just praised her work without knowing it, who was offering something that sounded dangerously close to genuine effort, and felt the ground shift beneath her. She'd been so certain he was exactly what he appeared to be, cold, practical, incapable of real connection. But maybe he was more complicated than that. Maybe they both were. I'm willing, she said. But Adrian, this can't be half-hearted. If we're going to make this work, we have to be honest with each other. Agreed. He stood, walked to her end of the table, and held out his hand. Shall we start over? Elara stared at his outstretched hand. Took it. His grip was warm, solid, real. Hello, he said. I am Adrian Blackthorne. I'm arrogant, overly logical, and terrible at marriage, but I'm trying to learn. Despite everything, she laughed. I'm Elara. I'm stubborn, secretive, and I write essays that would horrify you if you knew. He raised an eyebrow. Essays about what? Nothing important, she lied, and somewhere in the back of her mind a voice whispered, he's going to find out, and when he does, everything will fall apart. But that was a problem for later. For now, she let her husband, her complicated, unexpected, surprising husband, lead her to the drawing room where they talked until midnight about books and politics and ideas. For now, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this marriage could become something real. The lies could wait. The shift in their marriage was subtle at first. Adrian started coming home for dinner most nights. They talked. Actual conversations, not the stilted exchanges of strangers forced into proximity. He asked her opinions on political matters, seemed genuinely interested in her answers. She found herself laughing at his dry observations about London society, the way he could dissect someone's pretensions with a single raised eyebrow. It was dangerous, because the more time she spent with him, the harder it became to maintain the wall between Elara the wife and a lady of quality the essayist. Her 6th essay published on a Thursday morning. This one was different, sharper, more personal. She'd written about the wedding night tradition, the expectation that a woman's body belonged to her husband immediately upon marriage, regardless of her feelings or consent. She'd written about Adrian leaving, though she'd disguised the details enough that no one could connect it to them specifically. The groom departs for business, while the bride sits alone in unfamiliar rooms, learning the first lesson of aristocratic marriage. You are not a partner, but a possession, to be attended to when convenient. She'd hesitated before submitting it. This one felt too close, too raw. But that was precisely why it mattered. Adrian found her in the garden that afternoon, the newspaper tucked under his arm. Have you read today's essay? He asked without preamble. Elara's stomach clenched. Not yet. You should. He handed her the paper, his expression unreadable. It's her best work. She took it with hands that wanted to shake, forced herself to read slowly, as if seeing the words for the first time. Adrian settled onto the bench beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She's writing about her own marriage now. Did you notice? The details are too specific to be hypothetical. You think so? I'm certain. That passage about the wedding night, no one writes that viscerally unless they've lived it. He was quiet for a moment. Her husband is a fool. Alara's breath caught. Why do you say that? Because he had something valuable and didn't recognize it. He treated a partnership like a transaction and then wondered why it felt empty. Adrian turned to look at her. I did the same thing to you. Adrian. No, let me finish. His jaw was tight. I married you for practical reasons. I was honest about that, at least, but I didn't stop to consider what that honesty would cost. I didn't think about what it would be like for you, walking into a stranger's house, trying to build a life from nothing while I continued on as if nothing had changed. Alara stared at him, the newspaper forgotten in her lap. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong, and I'm saying this woman, whoever she is, deserves better than what she's getting. They both do. The irony was almost painful. He was defending her to herself, apologizing for something he only half understood, and all the while she was lying to him with every breath. Marriage is complicated, Alara said carefully. Maybe they're both trying their best. Maybe. Adrian stood, pacing a few steps away. But trying isn't enough if you're trying to maintain something broken. Real change requires risk. What kind of risk? He turned back to her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. The kind where you stop pretending and start being honest about what you actually want. And what do you want, Adrian? A real marriage. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Not a contract, not an arrangement, something honest. Alara's throat was dry. That's a dangerous thing to want. I'm aware. He moved closer, crouching down so they were eye level. But I've spent 3 weeks talking to you, really talking, and I've realized something. You're the most interesting person I know. Sharp, funny, completely unafraid to challenge me. And I've wasted months treating you like an afterthought. Her heart was hammering. Adrian, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. He stood, brushed off his trousers. I have a meeting in an hour, but I'll be home for dinner. And Alara, thank you. For what? For being patient with me. For not giving up. He smiled, that rare, transforming smile that made him look like someone she could actually love. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful. He walked away before she could respond. Alara sat in the garden until the shadows grew long. The newspaper crumpled in her fists and felt the trap of her own making close around her. He was trying. Genuinely, awkwardly trying to build something real. And she was lying to him every single day, writing essays that attacked everything he believed in while sitting across from him at dinner and pretending to be someone she wasn't. This couldn't continue. Something had to break. She just didn't know which would shatter first, the marriage or the truth. The 7th essay arrived at the London Observer offices with a new edge. Alara had stayed up until 3 a.m. writing it, fueled by coffee and guilt, and a kind of reckless fury she couldn't quite name. She wrote about intellectual dishonesty, about men who claimed to value intelligence in women, but only when it didn't threaten their own authority, about the double bind of being told to speak your mind and then being punished when you actually did. They say they want an equal partner. They praise intelligence, celebrate wit, encourage education, but the moment a woman's mind becomes inconvenient, when she questions rather than affirms, challenges rather than supports, suddenly she is difficult, unreasonable, unwomanly. The problem is not that we are too stupid, it is that we are too smart, and they cannot bear it. She mailed it anonymously, as always, but this time her hands shook as she dropped the envelope into the postbox. The essay ran 2 days later, and this time the response wasn't just debate, it was fury. Letters flooded into the newspaper, both supporting and condemning a lady of quality. Politicians gave speeches about the erosion of social values. Clergymen preached sermons about women knowing their place. 3 separate editorials demanded the author reveal herself and face consequences for her seditious views. Adrian brought home 5 different newspapers that evening, spreading them across the dining table. It's chaos, he said. And he was smiling, actually smiling. She's caused absolute chaos. Alara felt sick. You're enjoying this? Of course I am. Look at this. He pointed to a particularly vitriolic letter from a member of Parliament. Lord Ashworth is so threatened by her arguments that he's reduced to calling her hysterical. And here, he flipped to another page. Lady Morrison wrote a response that's almost as good as the original essay. This woman has started something genuinely important. Important or dangerous? Both. Adrian's eyes were bright with intellectual excitement. That's what makes it fascinating. She's touching on truths that most people would rather ignore. And she's doing it so skillfully that even her opponents have to engage with the substance of her arguments. Alara forced herself to keep her voice steady. You've changed your mind about her then. You said she was naive. I was wrong. He sat down, rifling through the newspapers. I was dismissing her because her conclusions made me uncomfortable. But discomfort isn't the same as inaccuracy. She's right about most of it, even if I don't want to admit it. What parts is she right about? Adrian looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. The part about intellectual dishonesty, for one. I've watched men praise their wives' intelligence and then ignore their opinions in the same breath. I've done it myself. Have you? Yes. He set down the paper. With you specifically. Those first months I assumed you were decorative, pleasant enough, but not someone I needed to listen to. I was an ass. You were, Alara agreed, but you're trying to change. Trying isn't enough. This essay, he tapped the page. It's about men like me. Men who think they're progressive because they allow their wives to read, but who don't actually respect what those wives think. And she's calling us out for it. Alara's chest felt tight. Does it bother you, being called out? It should. That's the point. Adrian leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking about what she wrote in the previous essay, about marriage being a transaction, and I realized something. What? She's not just criticizing aristocratic marriage in general. She's writing about her own. Every essay has gotten more personal, more specific. Whoever this woman is, she's trapped in exactly the kind of marriage she's describing. That's quite an assumption. Is it? He looked at her intently. Read the essays again, Alara. The details, the observations, they're too precise to be theoretical. She's living this, and she's brilliant enough to turn her pain into something that might actually change things. Alara couldn't breathe. He was too close to the truth, and he had no idea. What if, she started, then stopped. What if what? What if revealing herself would destroy everything? What if the only reason people listen is because they don't know who she is? Adrian frowned. Why would revealing herself destroy it? Because the moment she has a name and a face, she stops being an idea and becomes a target. They'll attack her character, her marriage, her family. They'll make it about her instead of about the arguments. You're probably right. He gathered the newspapers into a stack. But I hope she does it anyway. Anonymity has its uses, but real change requires people to stand behind their convictions. She can't hide forever. He had no idea what he was asking. No idea that the woman he was talking about was sitting across from him, lying with every word. Alara stood abruptly. I need some air. Are you all right? Fine, just tired. She fled to her rooms before he could ask anything else, locked the door, and leaned against it with her heart racing. This was spiraling out of control. Every essay brought more attention, more scrutiny, more risk, and every conversation with Adrian made the web of lies more complex. She had to stop, had to end this before it consumed everything. But when she sat down at her writing desk and pulled out fresh paper, her hands moved without conscious thought. Essay number 8 practically wrote itself. 3 days later, Adrian hosted a dinner party. 20 guests from the highest echelons of London society. Politicians, academics, wealthy merchants who'd bought their way into respectability. Alara wore emerald silk and diamond earrings and played the perfect hostess while her essay circulated in every drawing room in the city. This one had pushed further than all the others combined. She'd written about power, how it was distributed, who was allowed to claim it, what happened to women who reached for it anyway. She'd named no names, but the implications were clear enough to make certain men very, very nervous. The dinner conversation was carefully polite until the 4th course, when Lord Ashworth, the same man who'd called her hysterical in print, brought it up. This lady of quality nonsense has gone too far, he announced, his face already flushed with wine. Someone needs to unmask the woman and put a stop to it. Why? Adrian's voice was mild, but Alara recognized the edge in it. Does her writing threaten you, Ashworth? It threatens the social order. Women getting ideas about equality, about having voices in matters beyond their comprehension, it's dangerous. I see. Adrian took a sip of wine. So your position is that women are too stupid to understand politics? I didn't say stupid. You said beyond their comprehension. That's the same thing. Ashworth's face went redder. I'm saying there are natural roles, Blackthorn. Men lead, women follow. That's how civilization functions. Civilization functioned for millennia with slavery, too. Doesn't make it right. The table went silent. Alara's fingers tightened on her fork. Lady Morrison, seated to Adrian's left, spoke up. I found the latest essay rather compelling, actually. The section about women being punished for the same ambition that's celebrated in men. That resonated. Of course it resonated with you, Margaret, Ashworth said dismissively. You've always had unconventional views. Unconventional meaning intelligent? Adrian's tone was dangerously pleasant. Ashworth, have you actually read the essays, or are you just reacting to the idea of them? I've read enough to know they're seditious. They're analytical. There's a difference. They're written by a woman who clearly doesn't understand her place. Adrian set down his glass with a soft click. And what is her place exactly? Silent? Obedient? Grateful for whatever scraps of respect men decide to grant her? Alara stared at her husband. He was defending her, really defending her, and he had no idea. I'm saying, Ashworth ground out, that some ideas are better left unspoken. This woman is undermining the foundations of society. Good, Adrian said. Maybe those foundations need undermining. The shocked silence that followed was broken by nervous laughter from several guests. Lady Morrison raised her glass. Well said, Blackthorn. The conversation moved on, but Alara barely heard it. She was too busy watching Adrian, this man who'd just taken a public stand against half the men at his own table, who'd defended ideas he didn't know were hers with a conviction that made her chest ache. After dinner, the men retired to the smoking room while the women gathered in the drawing room. Alara endured 20 minutes of careful small talk before excusing herself, claiming a headache. She found Adrian in his study, a glass of brandy in one hand, staring at the fire. That was quite a performance at dinner, she said from the doorway. He looked up, smiled tiredly. Ashworth is an idiot. Someone needed to say it. You didn't have to defend her so vigorously. Yes, I did. He gestured for her to come in. Sit, please. Alara settled into the chair across from him. Why? Because she's right. About almost everything. And because men like Ashworth are terrified of women who think, and that terror is pathetic. He swirled the brandy in his glass. I've been thinking about what you said, about revealing herself being dangerous. And you were right. The moment she has an identity, they'll destroy her. Not because her arguments are wrong, but because attacking her character is easier than confronting uncomfortable truths. So what should she do? Keep writing, keep pushing, make them engage with the ideas rather than the person. He met her eyes. But Alara, if I ever found out who she was, I'd protect her, however I could. The words hit like a punch. Why would you do that? Because someone who's brave enough to speak truth to power deserves protection. And because, he paused, choosing words carefully, because I'm starting to understand what it's like to be trapped in a system that demands dishonesty. Alara's heart was pounding. Adrian, our marriage was a lie, he said quietly. A beautiful, profitable lie. And I'm tired of it. I want something real, even if it's messy, even if it's difficult. She should tell him, right now, this moment, she should tell him everything. But the words stuck in her throat, and before she could force them out, a knock sounded at the door. Excuse me, Your Grace? The butler's voice was apologetic. Lord Ashworth is asking to speak with you before he departs. Adrian sighed, stood. I'll be right there. He looked at Alara. We'll finish this conversation later. Yes, she whispered. Later. He left, and she sat alone in the study, surrounded by books and firelight and the weight of lies that were getting too heavy to carry. The breaking point came exactly 1 week later. Alara's 9th essay was her most controversial yet. She'd written about the sexual double standard, how men's affairs were overlooked while women's reputations could be destroyed by the mere suggestion of impropriety. She'd written about ownership, about the assumption that a wife's body belonged to her husband regardless of her own desires. It was brutal, unflinching, and it made powerful men very, very angry. The essay ran on a Monday. By Wednesday, there were calls in Parliament to ban the London Observer from publication unless they revealed their anonymous contributor. By Friday, someone had offered a reward for information leading to the identity of a lady of quality. Adrian came home that evening with murder in his eyes. "They're hunting her," he said without preamble. "They've put a price on her identity." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" £1,000 to anyone who can provide proof of who she is. He threw his hat onto a chair with more force than necessary. "They're not even pretending it's about civil discourse anymore. They want to silence her." "Can they do that?" "They can try. Freedom of speech is a lovely concept until someone uses it to make you uncomfortable." He paced the length of the drawing room. "I've been asking around, trying to figure out who she might be. The writing style, the observations. I have theories." Ilara's hands went numb. "Theories?" "She's educated, definitely upper class. Married, obviously and recently. She has access to good libraries and time to write." He turned to look at her. "There aren't that many women who fit that profile. London is a large city. Not as large as you'd think, once you narrow it down." He moved closer, studying her face. "Ilara, if you knew who she was, would you tell me?" The question hung in the air between them. "Why do you want to know?" she asked. "Because I want to help her, protect her, if I can. And if she doesn't want your protection, then I'd respect that. But at least she'd have the choice." He sat down beside her, his expression intense. "I know you think I don't understand what it's like to be powerless. You're right, I don't. But I'm trying to learn, and part of that learning is recognizing when someone needs support, even if they're too proud to ask for it." Ilara's throat was tight. "What if the truth is more complicated than you think?" "Truth usually is." "What if knowing would change everything between us?" Adrian went very still. "Ilara, what are you saying?" This was it, the moment. She could keep lying, keep hiding, keep the marriage and the essays in separate boxes and hope they never collided, or she could risk everything on honesty. She stood, walked to her writing desk in the corner of the room, and pulled out a folder. Her hands were shaking as she returned to the sofa and handed it to him. "What is this?" "Open it." He did. Inside were her drafts, all 9 essays in her handwriting, with edits and notes in the margins. Adrian stared at the pages, looked up at her, looked back down at the pages. "You," he said. His voice had no inflection. "You're her." "Yes. The wedding night essay, the intellectual dishonesty, all of it." "Yes." He set the folder down very carefully, like it might explode. "How long?" "Since the beginning. Since the week after we married. So every conversation we've had about her, about the essays, about the arguments, you were listening to me analyze your own work." "Yes." "And you never said anything." "I couldn't." Ilara's voice was steady, but her heart was hammering. "You would have stopped me. Or worse, you would have been humiliated, and our marriage would have been destroyed." Adrian stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical thing. "That first essay," he said finally, "about me leaving on our wedding night. You wrote that sitting alone in this house, hating me. Not hating, but yes, alone. And I read it and called you naives." He laughed, a bitter sound. "The irony is extraordinary." "Adrian?" He turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. "Did you enjoy it? Watching me defend you while you lied to my face?" "No. It was agony." "Was any of it real? These past weeks, the conversations, the—" He stopped. "Was any of it real, or was I just material for your next essay?" The accusation stung because it was fair. "It was real, all of it. I didn't expect to actually like you, Adrian. I didn't expect you to change, or to try, or to become someone I could—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Someone you could what?" "Someone I could care about." He stared at her, but not enough to be honest. "I'm being honest now. Only because you're backed into a corner. If they weren't hunting for you, would you ever have told me?" Ilara wanted to lie, but she'd done enough of that. "I don't know." Something in his face shifted. "Get out." "What?" "Get out of this room. I need to think, and I can't do that with you here. Adrian, please. Now, Elara. She fled, made it to her bedroom before the tears came, hot and furious and useless. She'd known this would happen, had known from the first essay that the truth would eventually surface and destroy everything. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. 3 hours later, a knock came at her door. Elara, Adrian's voice. We need to talk. She opened the door. He looked exhausted, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, his cravat loosened. I've made a decision, he said. Her heart stopped. What kind of decision? I'm going to help you. What? The essays, the anonymity, all of it. He met her eyes. I'm going to help you keep writing, and I'm going to make sure no one finds out who you are. Elara stared at him. Why would you do that? Because you're the most brilliant, infuriating, complicated person I've ever met. Because you've been fighting alone for months and you shouldn't have to. And because... He stepped closer. Because I love you, and I'm not going to let them destroy you. The words hit like lightning. You love me? Apparently. His smile was crooked, pained. Terrible timing, I know. You lied to me, I'm furious about it, and I still love you. We're both idiots. Elara laughed through tears. Complete idiots. So here's what we're going to do. Adrian's voice shifted into the practical tone he used for strategy. You keep writing. I'll create a network of people who can protect your identity. Editors, publishers, friends I trust. We'll spread misinformation, create false leads, make sure anyone looking for a lady of quality is chasing ghosts. That's incredibly risky, I know. But you started something important, Elara, and I'm not letting a 1,000-pound bounty silence the smartest political voice in England. She reached for his hand. He let her take it, his fingers warm and solid. I'm sorry, she said, for lying, for all of it. I know. He squeezed her hand. And I'm sorry for being the kind of husband you needed to lie to. We're both learning. This could ruin you, Adrian. If anyone finds out you're helping me, then we'll deal with it together. He pulled her close, his arms solid around her. No more secrets. No more lies. From this moment on, we're partners. Really partners. Elara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in cedar and smoke and something that was uniquely him. Partners, she agreed. But even as she said it, she felt the shadow of what was coming. The hunt wouldn't stop. The reward would grow. And eventually someone would get close enough to the truth that even Adrian's protection wouldn't be enough. When that moment came, everything they were building would be tested. She just hoped they were strong enough to survive it. They had 2 weeks of relative peace before the first real threat arrived. 2 weeks where Elara wrote her 10th essay, a surgical dissection of inheritance laws that left male heirs wealthy and daughters dependent, while Adrian built a careful network of protection around her identity. 2 weeks where they talked until dawn, argued about philosophy and politics, discovered that intellectual sparring was its own form of intimacy. 2 weeks where the marriage that had started as a transaction began transforming into something neither of them had names for yet. Then Lord Ashworth showed up at their door with a ledger and a smile that made Elara's skin crawl. Blackthorn, he said, pushing past the butler without waiting for invitation. We need to talk, privately. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. My study. Elara watched from the top of the stairs as they disappeared down the hallway. Every instinct screamed danger. She waited 5 minutes, then moved silently down the corridor to the small music room that shared a wall with Adrian's study, pressed her ear against the paneling. Absurd accusation, Adrian was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. Is it? Ashworth's voice was oily, pleased. I've done some digging, Blackthorn. Your wife is educated, well-read, has access to your extensive library. She arrived in London right before the first essay appeared. And most damningly, you've been defending this mysterious woman with unusual passion. I defend good writing. That's not evidence. Perhaps not. But this is. Sound of papers rustling. Financial records from the London Observer. They pay their contributors by bank draft. The drafts are always collected by the same messenger service, Hampton and Sons. I had a conversation with Mr. Hampton. Very illuminating. Elara's blood went cold. He told you nothing, Adrian said. Client confidentiality. He told me the drafts go to an address in Mayfair. This address, specifically. Ashworth's smile was audible. Your address, Blackthorn. Silence. Alara could hear her own heartbeat. You're reaching, Adrian said finally. I have business dealings with the Observer. Those drafts could be for anything. Could be. But combined with everything else, your wife's education, the timing, your defensive posturing, it paints an interesting picture. Ashworth paused. Here's what I'm offering. A deal. I don't make deals with blackmailers. You'll make this one. I keep quiet about my suspicions. You withdraw your support for the factory reform bill currently in Parliament. Simple trade. That bill protects children from being worked to death. You want me to abandon it because you think my wife writes essays? I want you to remember where your loyalties lie. Our class, our system. It works because we maintain it. Your wife, if she is indeed our mysterious lady, is attacking that system, and you're helping her do it. Get out of my house. Think about it, Blackthorn. You have 24 hours. After that, I go public with everything I know. Your wife's reputation will be destroyed. Your marriage will be a scandal. Your political career will be finished, all because you chose to protect some woman with radical ideas. I said get out. Footsteps, door opening, Ashworth's voice drifting back in 24 hours. Choose wisely. Alara ran. Made it to her bedroom seconds before Adrian's footsteps echoed in the hallway. She was sitting at her dressing table, ostensibly fixing her hair, when he knocked. Come in. He entered, his face carved from stone. You heard? Not a question. She nodded. Adrian sat heavily on the edge of her bed. He doesn't have proof, just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. But if he goes public, the suspicion alone will be enough to destroy you. Then I'll stop writing. The words hurt like glass in her throat. I'll publish a statement saying I'm done, sign it with the pseudonym, and disappear. No. Adrian. No. He looked at her, his eyes fierce. You don't get to sacrifice your voice because a coward is threatening us. He's not threatening us. He's threatening you. Your career, your reputation. I don't care. You should care. You've worked your entire life to build your position. I'm not letting you throw that away from me. Adrian stood, crossed to her, pulled her to her feet. His hands were warm on her shoulders. Listen to me. I spent 30 years building a career on foundations I never questioned. I defended a system that keeps women voiceless and children in factories and the poor in their place, all because it benefited me to do so. And then you came along with your sharp mind and your brutal honesty, and you made me see what I'd been refusing to look at. That doesn't mean I'm not finished. His voice was gentle but implacable. Ashworth wants me to choose between protecting you and supporting that factory bill. He thinks they're separate choices, but they're not. They're the same fight, and I've already chosen. Alara felt tears burning behind her eyes. This will destroy you, or it will finally make me into someone worth being. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. We're not stopping, Alara. We're fighting, together. How? He has evidence, circumstantial, yes, but enough to raise questions. Once people start looking closely, then we give them something else to look at. Adrian's expression shifted into the calculating mask he wore during political negotiations. We need misdirection. Another candidate for who the lady might be. Someone believable enough to draw attention away from you. Who? He thought for a moment. Lady Morrison. Margaret Morrison? She's twice my age and happily married. She's also brilliant, outspoken, and has written political commentary before under her own name. If we can convince people she's the lady of quality, it would explain everything. The education, the access to information, the sophisticated arguments. She'd never agree to that kind of scrutiny. She might if we explain the stakes. Adrian began pacing, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Margaret hates Ashworth, has for years. If we tell her what he's trying to do, using blackmail to force political concessions, she might be angry enough to help. It was insane. It was dangerous. It might actually work. What if she says no? Alara asked. Then we find another way. But we don't stop writing, and we don't let Ashworth win. He turned to face her. Do you trust me? She thought about it. Really thought about it. This man who'd started as a stranger, who'd hurt her through negligence, who'd changed when confronted with his own failures. This man who was now risking everything he'd built for her sake. Yes, she said. I trust you. Good. He kissed her forehead, quick and fierce. Stay here. I need to send some messages. He left her standing in the middle of her bedroom, heart racing, mind spinning with all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. 20 hours until Ashworth's deadline. They had to move fast. Lady Margaret Morrison arrived at Blackthorn Manor at noon the next day, her carriage pulling up with the kind of dramatic flair she brought to everything. Alara watched from the window as Margaret swept inside, all burgundy silk and righteous indignation. Where is he? Margaret's voice carried up the stairs. Where's the bastard who thinks he can threaten you? Adrian met her in the entrance hall. Ashworth isn't here, Margaret, but thank you for coming. Of course I came. Your note said it was urgent. She spotted Alara descending the stairs, and her sharp eyes narrowed. This is about the Lady of Quality essays, isn't it? Alara froze mid-step. Margaret laughed, not unkindly. Oh, don't look so shocked. I've suspected for weeks. The writing style, the observations about new marriages, the way Adrian defends the work with such personal investment. I'm not stupid, dear. We need your help, Adrian said bluntly. They moved to the drawing room. Adrian explained Ashworth's ultimatum while Margaret listened with increasing fury, her teacup rattling against its saucer. That spineless, blackmailing worm, she spat when he finished. Using the factory bill as leverage. Children are dying in those factories, and he doesn't care because it might affect his investments. He'll expose Alara unless I withdraw support, Adrian said. Or you need someone else to take the blame. Margaret set down her teacup with a decisive click. You want me to claim I'm the Lady of Quality. Not claim, Alara said quickly. Just fail to deny it convincingly. Raise enough suspicion that people look at you instead of me. How would we do that? Adrian leaned forwards. You write a new essay. Something in the same style but signed with your real name. When people see the similarities, they'll make assumptions. We neither confirm nor deny. Just let the speculation build. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. It would destroy my reputation, you know. I'm already considered eccentric. This would push me from eccentric to scandalous. I know, Alara said softly. I can't ask you to... I'm not finished. Margaret's eyes were sharp. It would destroy my reputation among people whose opinions I don't value anyway. But it would also give me a platform. If people believe I'm the Lady of Quality, anything I write afterward will have that weight behind it, that power. You'd use it? Adrian asked. Of course I'd use it. I've been writing careful, polite commentary for years and nobody listens. But this could actually change things. She looked at Alara. The essays are good. Better than good. If people think I wrote them, I'll have influence I've never had before. But the scrutiny, Alara said, the attacks will be vicious. I'm aware. Margaret smiled grimly. But unlike you, dear, I'm 63 years old and past caring what society thinks. My children are grown, my husband is dead, and I have nothing left to lose. Let them come at me. I'll enjoy the fight. Relief flooded through Alara so powerfully she had to sit down. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We need to do this right. Margaret pulled out paper and pen from her reticule, because of course she carried writing materials everywhere. Help me draft this essay. It needs to match your style closely enough to be believable, but different enough that I can defend it as my own work. They spent the next 3 hours writing. Margaret was sharp, incisive, ruthless in her editing. The essay that emerged was about political corruption, specifically about men who used their positions to enrich themselves while claiming to serve the public good. It was a direct attack on Ashworth and men like him, and it was devastating. This will make you a target, Adrian warned. Good. Margaret signed her name at the bottom with a flourish. I've been too polite for too long. Time to draw some blood. They sent the essay to 3 different publications simultaneously. By evening, all 3 had agreed to run it. By the next morning, London was buzzing with speculation. Ashworth's deadline passed without incident. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. But Alara felt no sense of victory, only a cold awareness that they'd escalated a war they might not be able to control. Margaret's essay ran in the London Observer, the Daily Chronicle, and the Political Review on the same day. The response was immediate and explosive. Half of London became convinced Margaret Morrison was the mysterious lady of quality. The other half was certain it was a publicity stunt. Arguments erupted in coffee houses, drawing rooms, Parliament itself. Margaret handled it with savage grace. When asked directly if she was the lady, she smiled and said, "I'm a lady of quality, certainly. Whether I'm the lady is a matter of interpretation." Perfect. Ambiguous enough to fuel speculation, confident enough to be believable. Ashworth tried to push back, publishing a response claiming Margaret was a decoy and the real lady was still hidden. But without proof, he just looked paranoid and vindictive. For 2 weeks, it worked. The attention shifted. The scrutiny moved away from the Blackthorn household. Alara kept writing. Essay 12 explored educational disparities. Essay 13 tackled property rights. Each one was published under the original pseudonym, and each one was immediately attributed to Margaret. Adrian watched it all with carefully controlled tension. "This won't last forever," he told Alara one evening. "Eventually someone will ask why Margaret is publishing under her own name and a pseudonym simultaneously. We'll deal with that when it happens." "Alara, I know it's not sustainable, but for now it's buying us time. Time to build support, to change minds, to make these ideas so widespread that silencing one person won't matter anymore." He pulled her close, his arms solid and warm. "You're extraordinary. You know that?" "I'm terrified." "You can be both." He kissed the top of her head. "We're going to survive this." She wanted to believe him, but the feeling of impending disaster wouldn't leave her. It arrived 3 days later in the form of a letter. The envelope was expensive paper, sealed with unfamiliar wax. It was addressed to the Lady of Quality, care of Blackthorn Manor. Alara's hands shook as she opened it. "I know who you are. I have proof. Meet me at the Serpentine Gallery tomorrow at 3 o'clock if you want to prevent its publication. Come alone. Bring no one, or the information goes to every newspaper in London by evening. No signature, just a single line at the bottom. You've made powerful enemies. It's time to negotiate." Adrian found her still holding the letter 20 minutes later, her face white. "What is it?" She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it once, twice. His jaw went tight. "It's a trap." "Probably." "You're not going." "I have to." "Alara, if they have actual proof, we need to know what it is, how they got it. Who else knows?" She forced herself to breathe. "And if it's a bluff, we need to call it before they try something worse." "Then I'm coming with you." "The letter says alone." "I don't care what the letter says." Adrian's voice was steel. "You're not walking into a potential ambush by yourself. If you're there, they won't talk. They'll just disappear and publish whatever they have. Or they'll hurt you." Alara met his eyes, saw fear there, and fury, and something deeper that made her chest ache. "I can handle myself." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is, I love you, and the thought of you in danger makes me want to burn down half of London." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "But you're right. We need to know what we're dealing with." She took his hand. "I'll be careful. I'll stay in public areas. If anything feels wrong, I'll leave immediately." "Promise me." "I promise." He pulled her into a fierce embrace. "If anything happens to you, I will destroy whoever is behind this, thoroughly and without mercy." "I know." She pressed her face against his chest. "That's why I have to go. To protect both of us." The next afternoon, Alara dressed carefully. Simple day dress, sturdy boots, hair pinned in a practical style. She tucked a small knife into her reticule. Adrian's insistence, though she doubted she'd need it. The Serpentine Gallery was crowded with afternoon visitors, artists, couples, families enjoying the unseasonably warm weather. Good. Hard to make someone disappear in a crowd. She arrived at precisely 3 o'clock and waited. A young woman approached 10 minutes later. Early 20s, plain dress, nervous eyes. She sat on the bench beside Alara without preamble. "You came." "I'm here." "Who are you?" "My name is Catherine Wells. I worked for Lord Ashworth as a secretary." Alara's stomach dropped. "Worked?" "He dismissed me 2 days ago when he found out I'd been keeping copies of his correspondence." Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. "Including the private investigator's report about you." "What report?" "Ashworth hired someone to investigate the Lady of Quality. The investigator tracked the bank drafts, interviewed servants from this household, spoke with people who've seen you at the library. He built a comprehensive case proving you're the author. Where is this report now? I have it. All of it. Ashworth doesn't know I copied it before he fired me. Alara forced herself to stay calm. What do you want? I want you to keep writing. Catherine looked at her directly for the first time. Those essays changed my life. Made me realize I didn't have to accept being dismissed without references, being treated like property just because I'm a woman without connections. I want to help you. By blackmailing me? By warning you. Catherine pulled a folded document from her bag. Ashworth is planning to publish this himself. He's waiting for the right moment, probably when the factory bill comes up for vote, to maximum damage. I wanted you to know so you could prepare. Alara took the document with numb fingers, scanned the pages. It was worse than she'd imagined. Detailed observations of her comings and goings, testimony from servants about her writing habits, financial records traced through 3 intermediaries back to Blackthorn Manor. It was comprehensive, damning, undeniable. Why are you really doing this? Alara asked. Catherine's jaw tightened. Because Ashworth destroyed my reputation when he dismissed me, told everyone I was stealing from him, that I couldn't be trusted. I can't get another position, can't support my mother, can't... Her voice broke. You wrote about women having no recourse when men abuse their power. You were writing about me, about all of us. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Fight back. Catherine stood. There's a second investigator, someone Ashworth hired quietly, working separately from the first. I don't know who it is or what they've found, but they're still active. Be careful. Wait, where can I reach you if I need... But Catherine was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd with practiced ease. Alara sat on the bench holding the document that could destroy everything and felt the trap closing tighter. She made it home by 4:30, found Adrian in his study, a decanter of whiskey already half empty on his desk. Well? He asked. She handed him the investigator's report without speaking. He read it in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he threw the entire thing into the fireplace. Adrian, we needed to know what they had. Now we know. He poured himself another drink. Ashworth is going to publish this, probably within the week. And when he does, everything falls apart. Not if we publish first. He looked at her sharply. What? If he publishes, it's an exposé. A scandal. We're on the defensive. Alara's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place. But if I reveal myself first, on my own terms, it's not a scandal. It's a statement. Alara, that's insane, is it? Think about it. Ashworth wants to use my identity to silence me, to force you to abandon the factory bill, to punish us both for challenging him. But if I reveal myself before he can, if I write an essay explaining exactly why I stayed anonymous and what that says about how society treats women who speak out, you'll be destroyed. Maybe. Or maybe I'll become something he can't control. She moved closer, gripping his arms. The essays have support, Adrian. Real support. People are listening. If I step forward and claim that work, if I explain the stakes clearly enough, they'll tear you apart. Some will, but others won't. And those others are the ones who matter. Adrian stared at her like she'd suggested jumping off a cliff. You're serious? Completely. Alara, this is the most reckless, dangerous, brilliant thing you've ever proposed. He laughed a little wildly. And it might actually work. It has to work, because hiding isn't sustainable, and letting Ashworth control the narrative will destroy us anyway. At least this way we're fighting on our terms. He pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. If we do this, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same. I know. Society will be vicious. I know. I'll stand with you, whatever happens. I know. She pulled back to look at him. That's why I can do this. They spent the rest of the evening planning. Strategy, timing, which publication to use, what to say, and what to hold back. By midnight, they had a draft. By dawn, Alara had written the most important essay of her life. It was called Unmasked, Why I Wrote in Shadows and Why I Step into Light. She wrote about fear, the rational fear that speaking truth would destroy her before anyone heard it. She wrote about power, how it was distributed, who was allowed to claim it, what happened when someone reached for it anyway. She wrote about marriage, hers specifically, the cold beginning and the complicated evolution into something real. She wrote about Adrian, named him, described his transformation from distant stranger to genuine partner, made it clear that he'd been defending her work without knowing it was hers, that his change had been real and hard-won. And she wrote about why silence wasn't sustainable, why stepping forward was both terrifying and necessary, why some fights were worth the cost. It was raw, personal, unflinching. It was the truth. "Are you sure?" Adrian asked when she finished reading it aloud. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They sent it to the London Observer that morning. The editor sent back a message within an hour. "We'll run it tomorrow. Front page. This is going to change everything." That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the grounds of Blackthorn Manor, this house that had felt like a prison and somehow become home, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Adrian found her there near midnight, didn't say anything, just stood beside her, his hand warm in hers. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "I'm not changing my mind." "Good." He turned her to face him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they say or do or try, we face it together. Agreed?" "Agreed." He kissed her then, fierce and tender and full of something that tasted like forever. When they finally pulled apart, Alara rested her forehead against his. "I'm terrified. Me too. But not enough to stop." "No, not enough to stop." They stood together in the darkness, holding each other against what was coming. The essay would publish in 8 hours. By noon tomorrow, all of London would know the truth, and then the real war would begin. Alara's hands were steady when she finally climbed into bed. She'd made her choice, committed to the fight. Whatever happened next, at least she'd face it standing in the light instead of hiding in shadows. She closed her eyes and waited for dawn. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Ashworth wasn't waiting for her essay to publish. He'd already set a different plan in motion, one that would hit before she could tell her own story. The knock on the door came at 5 in the morning, frantic pounding that woke the entire household. Adrian reached the door first, found a messenger, wild-eyed and gasping. "Your Grace, you need to come quickly. Someone broke into the Observer offices. They took the printing plates. All the copies of tomorrow's edition, they're gone." Alara appeared at the top of the stairs, her face white. The messenger continued, words tumbling out. "And there's more. Lord Ashworth has called an emergency session of Parliament. He's presenting evidence about the Lady of Quality. Today. In 3 hours." Adrian's expression went blank with shock. Alara gripped the banister. "He's going to expose me before I can expose myself." "What do we do?" Adrian's voice was raw. She looked at him, this man who'd promised to stand with her, who'd risked everything for her sake. And she made a decision that would either save them or destroy them both. "We go to Parliament," she said. "We walk in there before he can speak, and I tell them myself." "Alara, you can't just watch me." The carriage ride to Parliament took 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Alara sat across from Adrian, her hands gripping the leather seat to keep them from shaking. She dressed in her finest, deep blue silk that made her look older, more formidable, but underneath the expensive fabric, her heart was trying to break through her ribs. "You don't have to do this," Adrian said for the 3rd time. "Yes, I do. We could leave. Right now. Leave London, leave England if necessary. Start somewhere new where Ashworth's reach doesn't extend. And abandon everything? The essays, the movement, the people who are listening?" She shook her head. "Running makes it look like I'm ashamed. I'm not ashamed. I know you're not. But walking into that chamber, Alara, they're going to eviscerate you. Probably." She met his eyes. "But they'll have to do it to my face, and I'll fight back." The carriage lurched to a stop outside the Parliament building. Through the window, Alara could see journalists already gathering, drawn by word of Ashworth's emergency session, vultures circling before the kill. Adrian's hand found hers. "Last chance. Stop asking me that. I have to, because once we walk through those doors, everything changes. I know." She squeezed his hand. "Let's go change it." They stepped out of the carriage together. The journalists surged forward immediately, shouting questions that blurred into a wall of noise. Adrian kept his body between them and Alara, his hand firm on her back as they pushed toward the entrance. "Your Grace, is it true Lord Ashworth has evidence about the Lady of Quality? Duke Blackthorn, will you be voting on the factory bill today? Is your wife involved in this scandal?" That last one made Alara stumble. Adrian's grip tightened, keeping her upright. "Don't answer," he muttered. "Not yet. Not until we're inside." They made it through the doors. The interior of Parliament was all marble and mahogany, built to intimidate. Men in expensive suits moved through hallways with the confidence of people who'd never been told no in their lives. Several of them stopped when they saw Alara. Women weren't allowed in the parliamentary chamber during sessions. The public gallery, yes, but not the floor itself. What she was about to do would break a dozen unwritten rules. Adrian, Lord Morrison, Margaret's son, appeared from a side corridor, his face tense. "I heard about the emergency session. Is it true what they're saying?" "Depends what they're saying. That Ashworth has proof. That he's going to name the Lady of Quality." His eyes flicked to Alara. "Mother sent me. She's in the gallery already, ready to make a scene if necessary." "Tell her she won't have to," Alara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm going to name myself." Morrison's eyes went wide. "You can't just walk onto the floor. Watch me." Adrian turned to Morrison. "Can you get word to our allies? Everyone who supports the factory bill, everyone who's been following the essays. I need them in that chamber, now." "What are you planning?" "Controlled chaos." Adrian's smile was sharp. "If Ashworth wants a spectacle, we'll give him one. But on our terms." Morrison nodded and disappeared back down the corridor. Alara looked at Adrian. "Controlled chaos? You're going to speak, and I'm going to make damn sure they listen." They moved through the hallways toward the main chamber. With each step, Alara felt herself shedding the careful duchess persona she'd worn for months. The woman who smiled politely and kept her opinions soft. That woman was gone. The person walking into this chamber was the one who'd written those essays. Sharp, unafraid, done with pretending. The chamber doors were closed. 2 guards stood outside. "Session is about to begin," one of them said. "Only members allowed inside." "I'm aware." Adrian's voice carried the weight of generations of aristocratic authority. "My wife needs to address the chamber." "That's not permitted, Your Grace." "I'm not asking for permission." Alara put her hand on Adrian's arm. "Let me." She stepped forward, looking the guard directly in the eye. "My name is Alara Blackthorn. In approximately 5 minutes, Lord Ashworth is going to stand in that chamber and tell everyone I'm the Lady of Quality. He's going to paint me as a scandal, a threat, a woman who doesn't know her place. I'm here to tell the truth first. Now, you can let me in, or you can try to stop me, but either way, I'm walking through those doors." The guard stared at her, looked at Adrian, back to Alara. He stepped aside. "Thank you," Alara said, and pushed open the doors. The chamber was filling rapidly, men in formal dress taking their seats, pages rushing about with documents. The energy in the room was electric. Everyone knew something significant was about to happen. Ashworth stood near the speaker's platform, conferring with 2 other lords. He looked up when Alara entered. His expression went from surprise to fury in a heartbeat. "What is she doing here?" His voice carried across the chamber. "Women are not permitted." "I'm not here as a woman." Alara's voice was clear, steady, loud enough to cut through the rising murmur. "I'm here as the Lady of Quality, and I'm claiming my own story before you can weaponize it." The chamber went dead silent. Every eye in the room turned to her. Alara felt the weight of their stares, shock, curiosity, hostility, disbelief. She lifted her chin and walked forward. Adrian moved with her, a solid presence at her shoulder. Not speaking, not interfering, just there. The speaker, Lord Pemberton, an older man with a face like weathered granite, stood. "This is highly irregular. Duchess Blackthorn, you must leave immediately." "No." Alara kept walking until she stood in the center of the chamber floor. "Lord Ashworth has called an emergency session to expose my identity. I'm here to save him the trouble and explain exactly why I wrote what I wrote. This is not a platform for what? For women? For truth?" She turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with as many men as possible. "You've spent weeks debating my essays, arguing about them, defending them, condemning them, but you never had to face the actual person who wrote them. Well, here I am. Face me. Ashworth recovered from his shock. You admit it, then. You're the one who's been writing those seditious— Seditious? Alara laughed, and it sounded sharp as broken glass. I wrote about marriage being treated as a transaction, about women having no legal recourse against abuse, about children dying in factories while rich men profit. Which part of that is seditious, the truth part? You attack the foundations of our society. I attack the rot in those foundations. There's a difference. She turned to address the full chamber. Lord Ashworth wanted to expose me because he thought my identity would be a weapon. He thought revealing that the Duke of Blackthorn's wife wrote those essays would create a scandal big enough to silence me and force my husband to abandon the factory bill. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several men shifted uncomfortably. But here's what he didn't understand, Alara continued. The essays aren't powerful because of who wrote them. They're powerful because they're true. And standing here claiming them publicly, I'm making a simple statement. I'm not afraid of you anymore. You should be. Ashworth's voice was cold. You've broken every rule of propriety. Propriety? Alara turned to face him directly. You want to talk about propriety? Let's talk about how you fired Catherine Wells for keeping evidence of your corruption, how you hired private investigators to stalk me, how you tried to blackmail my husband into abandoning legislation that would save children's lives. Where's the propriety in that? Ashworth's face went purple. You have no proof. Actually, she does. Margaret Morrison's voice rang out from the gallery. She stood, holding up a folder. Catherine Wells gave me copies of everything. Your correspondence with the investigators, the financial records showing how much you've invested in factories that use child labor, all of it. Would you like me to start reading aloud? The chamber erupted. Men shouting questions, demanding explanations. The speaker banging his gavel for order. Adrian stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. Gentlemen, you're missing the point. He moved to stand beside Alara. My wife wrote those essays because she's brilliant, educated, and brave enough to speak truth that needed speaking. I didn't know it was her at first. When I found out, I was angry. She'd lied to me, and that hurt. But do you know what I realized? He turned to look at Alara, and the expression on his face made her throat tight. I realized she lied because she had to. Because a woman writing under her own name would have been dismissed immediately. Because anonymity was the only protection she had against men who would rather silence her than listen to her. He turned back to the chamber. And that's exactly what Lord Ashworth is trying to do right now. Silence her by making her identity the scandal, instead of engaging with the substance of what she wrote. This is not how Parliament conducts business, the speaker said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then maybe it should be. Adrian's voice was steel. You've all read the essays. You've debated them for weeks. The arguments are sound, the evidence is compelling, and the conclusions are uncomfortable. So instead of dismissing them because a woman wrote them, why don't you actually address the substance? The substance is that she's attacking our way of life, someone called from the back benches. Our way of life includes children losing fingers in factory machinery, Alara shot back. It includes women being beaten by their husbands with no legal recourse. It includes daughters being sold to settle debts and called lucky for the privilege. If that's the way of life you're defending, then yes, I'm attacking it. And I'll keep attacking it until it changes. More shouting. The chamber was splitting visibly, some men nodding, others red-faced with fury. Lord Morrison stood. I move that we hear the Duchess speak, formally. Let her present her case, and then we can vote on whether the factory bill deserves consideration on its own merits rather than as a political bargaining chip. Seconded, called another voice. Then another. The speaker looked torn between protocol and pragmatism. This is unprecedented. So was giving you the vote once, Margaret called from the gallery. Progress tends to be unprecedented. That's how you know it's actually progress. Scattered laughter. The tension in the room shifted slightly, from pure hostility to something more complex. The speaker sighed. Very well, Duchess Blackthorn, you have 10 minutes. Make them count. Alara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. She'd expected to be thrown out, arrested, publicly humiliated. She hadn't expected to be given a platform. Don't waste it. She took a breath. Began. I wrote those essays because I was angry. Because I married a stranger and spent my wedding night alone while he went back to his regular life like I was a piece of furniture he'd purchased. Because I watched my father sell me to save his own reputation. Because everywhere I looked, I saw intelligent, capable women being told their only value was in their bloodlines and their ability to produce heirs. Her voice was steady now, gaining strength. But I kept writing because I realized something. My anger wasn't unique. My experience wasn't rare. Every woman in London society has a version of my story. We're just not allowed to speak it out loud. She turned slowly, addressing different sections of the chamber. You want to know why I stayed anonymous? Because I knew the moment I revealed myself, this conversation would stop being about ideas and start being about me, my character, my marriage, my fitness to have opinions at all. And I was right. That's exactly what Lord Ashworth tried to do. You deceived everyone, Ashworth interjected. You lied about who you were. I used a pen name. Authors do it all the time. The Bronte sisters published as men because they knew no one would take them seriously otherwise. Was that deception or was that survival? She didn't wait for an answer. I wrote anonymously because the ideas mattered more than my identity, but I'm standing here now because I realized something else. Hiding protects me, but it doesn't change anything. Real change requires people to stand up and be counted. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the copy of her 14th essay that was supposed to have published that morning. This was meant to run today before Lord Ashworth destroyed the printing plates. It's about courage, about the cost of speaking truth and why it's worth paying anyway. I'm going to read part of it now. Ashworth opened his mouth to object, but several other lords shushed him. Alara unfolded the paper and read, We are told from childhood that certain truths are better left unspoken, that women should be grateful for what they have rather than angry about what they lack, that questioning the system makes you ungrateful, unfeminine, dangerous. But I would argue the opposite. Accepting injustice makes you complicit, and complicity, wrapped in pretty manners and expensive dresses, is still complicity. Her voice gained strength, filling the chamber. I wrote these essays because I refuse to be complicit in my own oppression. I refuse to smile and nod while children die in factories so that lords can maintain their investments. I refuse to accept that marriage should be ownership rather than partnership. I refuse to pretend that intelligence is unfeminine or that speaking out is improper. She lowered the paper, looking directly at Ashworth. You wanted to expose me because you thought it would shame me into silence. But I'm not ashamed. I'm proud of what I wrote. I'm proud of starting conversations that needed to happen. And I'm standing here, in your chamber, claiming my work publicly because I want every woman in London to know. You don't have to accept the world as it is. You can fight to make it better. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then building. Alara looked up and saw it was coming from the gallery. Margaret, standing and applauding, her eyes fierce. Other women joined her. Then some of the men in the chamber itself. Not all of them. Not even most. But enough. Adrian stepped closer, his hand finding hers. He squeezed once, firm and warm. The speaker cleared his throat. Yes. Well, that was enlightening. Lord Ashworth, you called this emergency session. Do you have anything to add? Ashworth looked around the chamber, clearly calculating. He'd lost control of the narrative and he knew it. I maintain that this entire situation is inappropriate and sets a dangerous precedent. Noted. The speaker turned to the broader chamber. The factory bill is scheduled for vote next week. Given today's discussion, I suggest we proceed with that timeline and address each piece of legislation on its merits. Agreed? A chorus of ayes, stronger than the nays. Then this session is adjourned. The chamber erupted into conversation. Men gathering in clusters, arguing, gesturing toward Alara. Journalists who'd somehow made it inside were scribbling frantically. Adrian pulled Alara toward the exit before anyone could stop them. They made it into the hallway, through a side door, into a small antechamber where they could finally breathe. That was insane, Adrian said. He was grinning like a madman. Completely insane and absolutely brilliant. Alara leaned against the wall, legs shaking. I thought they were going to arrest me. They might still. But right now, you just changed the entire conversation. He cupped her face in his hands. You're extraordinary. I'm terrified. You can be both. He kissed her, quick and fierce. What you just did, Alara, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen. It's not over. Ashworth still has allies, and half that chamber thinks I'm a threat to civilization. True, But the other half is listening, and that's more than we had this morning. Margaret found them 10 minutes later, her face flushed with triumph. That was spectacular, absolutely spectacular. Did you see Ashworth's expression when I mentioned Catherine's evidence? Is it real? Ilara asked. The evidence? Every word. I had Catherine compile it all. Correspondence, financial records, testimony from dismissed servants. If Ashworth pushes this further, I have enough to bury him. She smiled grimly. But I don't think he will. He's lost the moral high ground. He still has political power. For now. But power built on secrets is fragile, and you just demonstrated that beautifully. Margaret's expression softened. How are you holding up? I'm not sure yet. Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. Margaret glanced at Adrian. You realize the vote on the factory bill just became about more than factories, don't you? It's become a referendum on whether Parliament can be challenged, on whether women's voices matter. I know. Adrian's jaw was tight. We need to make sure we have the votes. I'll work on that. You two should go home. The journalists are circling like sharks, and Ilara needs rest before the real storm hits. She was right. The aftermath of this morning would take days to fully unfold. They made it out of Parliament through a back entrance, avoiding the worst of the press. The carriage ride home was quiet. Ilara stared out the window, watching London pass by, and felt like she was seeing it for the first time. She'd done it. Walked into that chamber, claimed her work, told the truth to their faces. And she was still standing. What are you thinking? Adrian asked. That I'm not sure what happens next. Neither am I. But we'll figure it out together. Back at Blackthorn Manor, they found the house in chaos. Servants rushing about, piles of letters and telegrams arriving by the minute. Mrs. Carson met them at the door, her usually impassive face showing actual emotion. Your Grace, there are journalists at the gates, and these letters. They've been arriving since word spread about Parliament. Ilara looked at the stacks of correspondence. What do they say? I haven't opened them. They're addressed to you. She picked up the first letter. Her hands were still shaking as she broke the seal. Thank you. Thank you for speaking. You gave voice to things I've felt but couldn't say. Please don't stop. No signature, just those words. She opened another. You're a disgrace to your sex and your class. You should be ashamed. And another. I showed your essays to my daughter. She's 12. She asked me why things are the way they are. I couldn't answer her, but now I can tell her that some people are trying to change them. Thank you. She kept reading. The letters were split almost evenly, half praising her courage, half condemning her audacity. But they were all responding, all engaging with the ideas instead of ignoring them. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Adrian said quietly. Not everyone to agree, just everyone to think. Yes. She set down the letters. But I didn't expect it to feel like this. Like what? Like standing in the middle of an earthquake I started and can't stop. He pulled her close. Then we'll ride it out together. Whatever comes next. Over the next 3 days, London divided itself into camps. Those who supported Ilara's public stand and those who thought she'd committed unforgivable social crimes. The newspapers ran competing editorials. Drawing rooms became battlegrounds of debate. And through it all, the factory bill moved toward its vote. Ashworth tried to regain ground, publishing his own account of events that painted Ilara as manipulative and Adrian as besotted and foolish. But Catherine's evidence started leaking, carefully, strategically, through Margaret's network of allies. Proof of Ashworth's financial stake in keeping factories unregulated. Correspondence showing he'd fired workers who complained about conditions. The narrative shifted again. By the 5th day, some newspapers were running stories about corruption in Parliament itself, about lords protecting their investments at the cost of children's lives. Ilara kept writing. Essay 15 ran in 3 different publications simultaneously, discussing the economics of child labor and why moral arguments should outweigh profit margins. This time, it ran under her real name, Ilara Blackthorn, Duchess. The response was even more intense than before. But now people knew who to address their praise and criticism to. And Ilara answered both. She wrote letters to women who thanked her, encouraging them to speak their own truths. She responded to critics with careful arguments, refusing to engage with personal attacks, but dissecting logical fallacies with surgical precision. Adrian watched her work with something like awe. You're enjoying this? Parts of it. She sealed another letter. The parts where I get to argue with people who think women can't think logically. That's deeply satisfying. He laughed. You're terrifying. Good. The night before the factory bill vote, they hosted a dinner. 20 carefully selected guests, lords who were still undecided, their wives, several journalists, Margaret and her son. The conversation was pointed, intelligent, occasionally heated. Alara participated openly now. No more pretending to be the quiet duchess. She argued about labor economics, about moral obligations, about the cost of maintaining systems that served some at the expense of others. One of the undecided lords, an older man named Hartwell, watched her with narrowed eyes. You make compelling points, Duchess, but implementing these reforms will cost money, significant money, less than it costs in human suffering, Alara replied. And if we can afford to maintain estates like this one, she gestured at the expensive room around them, we can afford to ensure children aren't losing limbs in machinery. But the economic impact will be managed. Other countries have implemented similar reforms. The economy adjusted. And more importantly, it's the right thing to do regardless of economic convenience. You have very idealistic views. I have very practical views. I just happen to think that morality and practicality aren't mutually exclusive. She met his eyes. Children are dying, Lord Hartwell. We have the power to stop it. The only question is whether we have the courage. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I'll consider that. After the guests left, Adrian found Alara in the library. She was writing again, always writing. Hartwell came around, he said. I saw it happen. You convinced him. Maybe. We'll see how he votes tomorrow. Even if he votes against us, you changed his mind. That matters. She set down her pen. What if we lose tomorrow? What if the bill fails? Then we try again and again, until it passes or until we find a different way. He sat beside her. That's what you've taught me, that persistence matters more than perfection. When did you become optimistic? When I married a woman who walked into Parliament and claimed her power in front of everyone who said she couldn't. He smiled. You changed me, Alara. Changed what I thought was possible. She leaned against him, exhausted and wired and uncertain. Tomorrow will tell us if any of this mattered. It already matters. Look at what's happening, the conversations, the debates, the letters pouring in. You started something that's bigger than one vote. I hope you're right. The vote happened at 2 o'clock the next afternoon. Alara wasn't allowed in the chamber for the actual vote, women in the gallery only. But Margaret had secured them prime seats. They sat together, watching the floor below, as the speaker called for the vote on the factory reform bill. The chamber was packed, every seat filled, the energy crackling with tension. One by one, the lords stood to cast their votes. Yea or nay, lives or profits. It was close. Desperately close. Alara gripped the gallery railing, her knuckles white. Beside her, Margaret was counting under her breath. Lord Hartwell stood, paused, met Alara's eyes across the chamber. Yea, he said clearly. The final count came down to 3 votes. 3 votes separated the bill passing or failing. The speaker called the result. The yeas have it. The factory reform bill passes. The chamber erupted, cheering, protests, chaos. Alara felt tears streaming down her face. Margaret grabbed her hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt. You did it, Margaret whispered. You actually did it. We did it, Alara corrected. They found Adrian outside the chamber. He was surrounded by other lords, some congratulating him, some furious. He broke away when he saw Alara, pulled her into his arms right there in the hallway, in front of everyone. We won, he said against her hair. We won, she repeated, and it felt like the most important words she'd ever spoken. But even in that moment of triumph, Alara knew this was just the beginning. One bill passed, one victory claimed, but the larger fight for women's voices, for fundamental change, for a world that valued justice over tradition, that would take years, maybe a lifetime. And for the first time, she felt ready for it. That evening, back at Blackthorn Manor, Alara stood at her writing desk and began Essay 16. This one was different, not an attack or an argument, but a call to action. We have proven that change is possible. One bill, one vote, one step forward. But this is not the end. It is the beginning. To every woman reading this, Your voice matters. Your intelligence matters. Your courage matters. Do not wait for permission to speak truth. Do not wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment is now. She wrote until midnight, Adrian reading over her shoulder, offering suggestions, arguing about phrasing. When she finished, he kissed the top of her head. This is who we are now, partners in revolution. Partners in chaos, more like. Same thing. He turned her chair so she faced him. I love you, not despite your sharp mind and sharper tongue, but because of them. And I'm proud to stand beside you in whatever comes next. Alara pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like victory and uncertainty, and the future unfolding in ways they couldn't predict. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled. Ready for the next fight? Always. And somewhere in London, in drawing rooms and kitchens and quiet spaces where women gathered, copies of Alara's essays were being passed from hand to hand. Women reading them, discussing them, beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, their voices mattered too. The revolution had started with one woman writing in secret. It would continue with thousands speaking aloud. The revolution spreading across London started quietly. Too quietly for most men to notice until it was already unstoppable. 3 weeks after the factory bill passed, Alara received a letter from a woman in Manchester. 23 years old, factory worker, barely literate. The handwriting was shaky, the spelling creative, but the message was clear. I read your words. Someone read them to me. I told my foreman I won't work 16 hours no more. He fired me, but I don't care. You made me brave. Alara kept that letter in her desk drawer. Read it when the criticism got too loud, when the hate mail piled up, when she wondered if any of this mattered. It mattered to that woman in Manchester. That was enough. But the opposition wasn't giving up quietly. Ashworth had retreated temporarily, licking his wounds, but others filled the vacuum. A coalition of conservative lords started their own publication, The Guardian of Tradition, dedicated to preserving England's values against radical influences. Every issue featured at least one article attacking Alara specifically. Listen to this, Adrian said one morning, reading from the latest edition. The Duchess Blackthorn represents the worst impulses of modern womanhood, educated beyond her capacity to use knowledge wisely, ambitious beyond her station, and dangerously persuasive to those weaker minds who mistake eloquence for truth. That's actually a compliment buried in insults. How is that a compliment? They called you eloquent and persuasive. They wouldn't bother attacking you if you weren't effective. He tossed the paper aside. Though educated beyond her capacity is rich coming from men who can barely string a coherent argument together. Alara didn't smile. She was reading a different letter, this one from her father. She'd been avoiding it for 2 days. What does he say? Adrian asked gently. That I've disgraced the family name. That he regrets arranging our marriage because I've used it as a platform for unwomanly pursuits. That I should retire from public life before I destroy what little reputation the Vance family has left. She set it down carefully. He's ashamed of me. He's a coward who sold his daughter to save his pride. His opinion doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter, but it does. She met Adrian's eyes. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't expect them to hurt this much. He crossed to her, pulled her to her feet, held her close. You're changing the world, Alara. Of course it hurts. Nothing worth doing is painless. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, it's supposed to be true. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. I'm tired, Adrian. The essays, the letters, the constant fighting. I'm so tired. Then rest. I can't. There's too much to do. You can. Even revolutionaries need sleep. He kissed the top of her head. Come on. We're taking the day off. We can't just watch me. He dragged her away from the desk, out of the study, through the house to the stables. Within 20 minutes, they were on horseback, riding across the grounds of Blackthorn Manor with no destination and no purpose except to breathe. The autumn air was sharp and clean, trees blazing with color, the world continuing its cycles regardless of human drama. They rode in silence for an hour, then stopped by a stream at the edge of the property. Adrian helped Alara dismount, and they sat on the grass like they had nowhere else to be. Remember our wedding? Adrian said after a while. Hard to forget. I was an ass. Complete ass. I thought I was being practical, logical, treating marriage like a business arrangement because that's what I'd been taught to do. He picked up a stone, tossed it into the stream. I didn't know you could have both. Partnership and passion, intelligence and intimacy. I thought they were mutually exclusive. What changed your mind? You did. Every conversation, every argument, every moment where you refused to be what I expected, you changed everything I thought I knew about marriage, about women, about myself. He turned to look at her. I was living half a life before you, going through motions, following rules, never questioning why things were the way they were. And then you walked into Parliament and claimed your voice. And I realized this is what being alive actually feels like. Elara felt tears threatening. You're going to make me cry. Good. Cry if you need to. Nobody's watching except me, and I've seen you cry before. When? The night you told me who you were, after I sent you away. I heard you through the door. His voice was soft. It nearly killed me, knowing I'd hurt you that badly. But you came back. Because I'm not an idiot. Angry, yes. Hurt, definitely. But not stupid enough to lose the most extraordinary person I'd ever met over wounded pride. She leaned against him, his arms solid around her shoulders. What are we doing, Adrian? Really doing? We passed one bill, started some conversations. But the system is so much bigger than us. How do we actually change it? One fight at a time, one voice at a time. He was quiet for a moment. Margaret told me something interesting yesterday. There are women organizing, reading groups, discussion circles, informal gatherings where they talk about your essays and what they mean. It's spreading beyond London. Manchester, Bristol, Edinburgh, women are starting to speak up. That could be dangerous for them. It already is. But they're doing it anyway, because you showed them it was possible. Elara closed her eyes. I'm scared I'll let them down. You won't. But even if you stumble, even if you make mistakes, you've already given them something nobody can take away. Permission to use their own voices. They stayed by the stream until the sun started setting, then rode back to the manor. The break had helped, but the weight of responsibility still pressed down on Elara's shoulders. That evening, Margaret arrived unannounced with news that would change everything. Parliament is considering a new bill, she said without preamble, sweeping into the drawing room like a force of nature. Property rights for married women, real property rights, ability to own assets, keep inheritances, control their own money. Elara sat up sharply. That would fundamentally change marriage law. Exactly, and it's going to fail unless we fight for it. Margaret's eyes were fierce. The factory bill passed by 3 votes. This one is going to be harder because it directly threatens men's control over their wives' assets. We need a campaign, a real one. Who's sponsoring the bill? Lord Morrison, my son. He's got a coalition of younger lords who are willing to push for reform, but they need public support. They need the conversation to shift before the vote. Adrian leaned forward. What kind of campaign? Everything. Essays, obviously, but also public speaking events. Town halls where women can voice their concerns directly. Pressure on individual lords from their constituents. We make this impossible to ignore. Public speaking. Elara felt her stomach clench. You want me to give speeches? I want you to do what you've already done in Parliament. Speak truth clearly and refuse to back down. Just do it in multiple venues until the message penetrates. Margaret's expression softened slightly. I know it's asking a lot, but Elara, you have a gift for this, and we need you. Elara looked at Adrian. He was watching her carefully, leaving the decision entirely to her. If I do this, she said slowly, it needs to be bigger than just me. We bring other women forward, let them tell their own stories. Make it clear this isn't one duchess with radical ideas. It's thousands of women demanding fundamental change. Margaret smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They planned through the night, 6 public events over 3 weeks, building toward the parliamentary vote. Each event would feature multiple speakers, Elara, Margaret, and other women willing to risk social censure to speak publicly. They'd talk about real experiences, losing inheritances to gambling husbands, being left destitute when spouses died, having no legal recourse against financial abuse. It's going to be brutal, Margaret warned. They'll attack all of you personally, question your morals, your marriages, your fitness to have opinions. Let them. Elara's voice was steady. We'll keep speaking anyway. The first event was scheduled for the following Wednesday at Cavendish Hall, a venue large enough to hold 300 people. They sent invitations to newspapers, posted notices in public spaces, and spread word through the network of women's reading groups that had formed around Alara's essays. Adrian spent the week before coaching Alara on public speaking. How to project her voice, how to handle hecklers, how to stay focused when people inevitably tried to derail her. The key is not getting pulled into their framework, he said during one practice session. They'll try to make it about you personally, your marriage, your character, your appearance. Don't defend yourself. Redirect to the issue. What if they bring you into it, attack our marriage specifically? Then you tell the truth, that we started as strangers in a transaction and built something real through honesty and mutual respect. That's a better story than most marriages in our class can claim. The night before the first event, Alara couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, practicing her speech, changing phrases, doubting everything. Adrian found her at 2 a.m, still revising. "You're going to be brilliant," he said. "You don't know that." "I do. I've watched you argue with lords twice your age and win. I've seen you face down Ashworth in Parliament. I've read every essay you've written. You're ready for this, Alara. Stop second-guessing yourself. What if I freeze? What if I forget everything? Then you'll remember why you're doing this, and the words will come." He took the papers from her hands. "Come to bed. You need rest more than you need another revision." She let him pull her toward the bed, but her mind wouldn't quiet. "Adrian, what happens if we actually win this? If the property rights bill passes? Then thousands of women will have legal protection they don't have now. They'll be able to leave abusive marriages, keep their inheritances, control their own lives. And our marriage? What happens to us?" He was quiet for a moment. "We keep choosing each other, every day. Not because law compels it, but because we want to. That's what partnership actually means." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I love you. I don't think I've said that directly." "You haven't, but I knew." "How?" "Because you trusted me with your secrets. Let me see you scared. Let me stand beside you in the fights that matter." His hand found hers. "That's love, Alara, not the pretty words, the actual trust." "I love you," she said again, because it felt important to name it clearly. "I love you too. Now sleep. Tomorrow we change the world." Cavendish Hall was packed, 300 seats filled, with another 100 people standing in the back and spilling into the hallways. Journalists lined the walls, notebooks ready. The energy in the room crackled with anticipation and hostility in equal measure. Alara stood backstage with Margaret and 3 other women who'd agreed to speak. Catherine Wells was one of them, the former secretary who'd exposed Ashworth's corruption. The others were a widow who'd lost everything when her husband died because the law gave it all to his brother, and a young woman whose father had gambled away her inheritance before she came of age. "Remember," Margaret said quietly, "they want you to lose composure, to get emotional and prove you're too weak for serious discourse. Don't give them that satisfaction." "What if I am emotional?" Catherine asked. Her hands were shaking. "Then you channel it into your words. Emotion isn't weakness, it's fuel. Use it." Adrian appeared from the wings. "They're ready for you." Alara took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, walked onto the stage. The applause was mixed with boos. She stood at the podium, waiting for silence. It took almost a minute. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "My name is Alara Blackthorne. Some of you know me as the Lady of Quality. Some of you know me as the woman who dared to walk into Parliament uninvited. And some of you are here tonight hoping to see me fail spectacularly." Scattered laughter, some of it genuine. "I'm here to talk about marriage, not the romanticized version we're sold as children, but the legal reality. In England today, when a woman marries, she ceases to exist as a legal person. Her property becomes her husband's. Her inheritance becomes his to control. If he gambles it away, beats her, abandons her, she has no recourse. The law sees her as an extension of him, not a person in her own right." "That's tradition," someone shouted from the back. "Slavery was tradition too. We changed it." Alara didn't miss a beat. Tradition isn't an argument, it's an excuse for not thinking critically about whether something is actually just. She continued, laying out the case systematically. Statistics about women left destitute, examples of legal injustice, arguments for why property rights mattered not just morally, but economically. Then she brought up the other speakers. Catherine told her story, working for Ashworth, witnessing corruption, being destroyed professionally for speaking truth. Her voice shook but held. The widow described watching everything she'd helped build go to a brother-in-law who'd never worked a day in his life, simply because law said women couldn't inherit. The young woman talked about her father losing her inheritance at cards, joking about it afterward like it was a trivial thing, while she faced a future with no financial security. Each story landed like a hammer blow. The audience shifted from hostile to uncomfortable to thoughtful, at least parts of it. Then the questions started. Duchess Blackthorne, isn't it true your own marriage was a financial transaction? A journalist from the Guardian of Tradition. Yes. Arranged to save my family from bankruptcy and secure my husband a wife with an appropriate bloodline. I've been very public about that. So you benefited from the system you're now attacking. I survived the system. There's a difference. And surviving something unjust doesn't obligate me to defend it. She met his eyes. I'm using the platform that marriage gave me to dismantle the parts of the system that harm others. Would you prefer I stay silent? I'd prefer you show some gratitude for your position. I'm grateful for many things. My education, my husband's partnership, the opportunity to speak. But I'm not grateful for a system that treats women as property. Gratitude doesn't require accepting injustice. Another hand shot up. Lord Ashworth says you're dangerous, that you're undermining the foundations of society. Lord Ashworth says many things. Most of them are attempts to distract from his own corruption. She smiled thinly. But yes, I'm dangerous to a society built on inequality and silence. If that's what we're defending, then it deserves to be undermined. The questions continued, some hostile, some genuine. Alara handled each one with the precision she'd honed through months of written arguments. Beside her, the other women grew more confident, adding their own voices. 2 hours in, a woman stood in the middle of the audience, middle-aged, well-dressed, shaking with barely controlled emotion. My husband beat me for 5 years. I had nowhere to go, no money of my own, no legal right to leave. I stayed because the alternative was starvation. Her voice broke. You're the first person I've heard say that shouldn't be normal. Thank you. The hall went silent. Alara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but kept her voice steady. What's your name? Eleanor Pritchard. Eleanor, would you come up here? The woman hesitated, then made her way to the stage. Alara took her hand. Tell them what happened when you finally left. Eleanor's story poured out, brutal and honest. How she'd saved coins for 2 years, how she'd finally run with nothing but the clothes on her back, how society had shunned her for leaving, called her a bad wife, made her unemployable. But I'm alive, Eleanor finished, and I'm free. And that's worth every hard thing that came after. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. Not from everyone. A third of the audience sat silent or walked out. But enough. More than enough. They held 5 more events over the next 3 weeks, each one built on the last. More women came forward, more stories emerged. The tide of public opinion began to shift, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Adrian attended every event, standing in the wings, watching Alara command rooms full of skeptics and convert them into listeners. Afterward, he'd find her backstage, exhausted and exhilarated, and remind her to breathe. You're changing minds, he'd say. I can see it happening. Not fast enough. Fast enough that Lord Morrison thinks we have a real chance at passing the property rights bill. The vote was scheduled for a Tuesday in late November. Cold rain pounded London, turning streets to mud. Alara and Margaret secured their spots in the gallery early, joined by dozens of other women who'd been part of the campaign. The debate on the chamber floor was vicious. Lord after lord stood to condemn the bill as an attack on marriage, on tradition, on the natural order. Ashworth gave a particularly venomous speech about protecting families from women's financial irresponsibility. But others fought back. Lord Morrison made a passionate case for basic human rights. Adrian spoke about economic justice and the practical benefits of allowing women to participate more fully in commerce. Even Lord Hartwell, who'd barely voted for the factory bill, stood and said his daughter deserved better than losing her inheritance to her husband's poor decisions. The vote came down to 5 seats, 5 lords who could swing it either way. Alara watched each one stand. 3 voted yes, 1 voted no. The last one, Lord Pemberton, the speaker himself, stood slowly. The chamber held its breath. Yea, he said clearly. The property rights bill passed by a margin of 6 votes. This time, Elara didn't cry. She stood in the gallery, hands gripping the rail, and felt something fundamental shift in the world. It wasn't perfect. The bill had limitations, compromises forced by political reality, but it was real change. Legal protection where none had existed before. Margaret grabbed her hand. We did it. We did. This is just the beginning, you know. Property rights are one piece. There's voting rights, education reform, employment protections. I know, Elara smiled. We'll keep fighting. That evening, Blackthorn Manor hosted a celebration. Women who'd spoken at the events, lords who'd supported the bill, journalists who'd covered the campaign fairly. The house was loud with conversation and laughter. Elara found Adrian on the terrace, looking out over the grounds. Hiding from your own party? She asked. Taking a moment to appreciate what we've built. He turned to her. Do you realize what you've accomplished in less than a year? You went from writing anonymous essays to leading a movement that's changing fundamental law. We accomplished. This wasn't just me. It started with you. Your courage to speak when everyone said you shouldn't. Your refusal to accept injustice just because it was traditional. He pulled her close. I'm in awe of you, Elara, every single day. Even when I'm exhausting? Especially then. He kissed her softly. What's next for the famous Duchess Blackthorn? I'm working on a book, essays compiled with new material. Margaret thinks it could reach an even wider audience. Of course you are, he laughed. Will you ever stop? Would you want me to? Never. I fell in love with your mind. Asking you to stop using it would be like asking you to stop breathing. Inside, someone called for a toast. They returned to find the drawing room packed, glasses raised. Margaret stood at the center. To Elara Blackthorn, who taught us that speaking truth is more important than keeping peace. To partnership over ownership. To change over comfort. And to every woman in this room who refused to stay silent. Hear, hear, glasses clinked. Elara felt overwhelmed by the noise and warmth and impossible fact that this was her life now. Later, much later, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, Elara sat at her writing desk. Not to work, just to think. Adrian found her there, brought her tea without asking. What are you thinking about? He asked. The wedding. How different everything is from that day. You mean when I was an arrogant ass who left you alone on our wedding night? That's the one, she smiled. I hated you that night. I don't blame you, but I don't hate you now. Haven't for a long time. She turned to face him fully. You changed, Adrian. Really changed. That's rare. You gave me a reason to. Showed me what I was missing by staying locked in old patterns. He sat beside her. I spent 30 years thinking I knew how the world worked. Then you came along and proved I'd been looking at everything wrong. We both changed, that's the point. Is that what you'll write about in your book? Among other things, I want to write about what actual partnership looks like. Not the idealized version, but the messy reality, the fights, the compromises, the daily choice to keep showing up for each other. Sounds revolutionary. It is. Most people don't want to hear that marriage takes work. They want the fairy tale. Let them have their fairy tales. We have something better. He kissed her forehead. We have the truth. The book took 6 months to write. Elara worked on it between speaking engagements, between drafting new legislation with Margaret, between the 1,000 small tasks that came with being the most controversial duchess in England. Marriage as Partnership, a radical proposal, published in May. It sold out its first printing in 3 days. The response was predictably divided. Traditionalists called it an abomination. Progressives called it essential reading. Women across England, and increasingly across Europe, wrote to say it had changed how they viewed their own marriages, their own lives. Elara's father sent a brief note. I was wrong about you. You're stronger than I ever knew. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was acknowledgement. Adrian framed the first copy of the book, hung it in his study where he could see it while he worked. Why? Elara asked. Because that book is proof that we survived. That we took something cold and transactional and turned it into something real. That's worth remembering. They were different now, both of them. Adrian had become known in Parliament not just as a powerful lord, but as a genuine reformer, someone willing to challenge his own class for the sake of justice. Elara had become a symbol, not always comfortably, of what women could accomplish when given the chance. Their marriage had become something neither had anticipated, a partnership of equals who challenged each other, supported each other, and refused to let the other settle for less than they were capable of. One evening in late autumn, exactly 2 years after their wedding, they stood together at the same window where Alara had once stood alone and miserable. "Remember what you thought that first night?" Adrian asked. "That I'd made a terrible mistake, that I was trapped in a cold house with a stranger who didn't care if I existed. And now?" She leaned against him. "Now I think that sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings." "This isn't an ending." "No." She smiled. "It's barely a beginning. There's still so much to change. Voting rights, employment discrimination, education access. I know. And we'll fight for all of it." He turned her to face him. "But right now, in this moment, can we just appreciate how far we've come?" She looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger, then an adversary, then a partner, and finally the person she trusted most in the world, and felt gratitude so profound it hurt. "Yes," she said, "we can do that." They stood together as darkness fell over Blackthorn Manor, over London, over an England that was slowly, painfully, inevitably changing. Not because of one person or one speech or one law, but because enough people had decided that tradition wasn't sufficient justification for injustice. And in 1,000 homes across the country, women were reading Alara's words and beginning to ask questions they'd never dared ask before. Beginning to speak truths they'd been told to keep silent, beginning to believe that their voices mattered. The revolution that had started with one angry duchess writing in secret had become something bigger than any of them could have imagined. It would continue long after Alara and Adrian were gone, carried forward by all the women who learned that speaking truth was more important than staying comfortable. But for now, in this moment, they simply stood together in the gathering dark. Two imperfect people who'd stumbled into partnership and built something rare, a marriage forged not by tradition or obligation, but by choice, honesty, and the relentless belief that they could be better together than they'd ever been apart. And that, more than any law or essay or public victory, was the real triumph. The carriage that had brought Alara to this house 2 years ago had carried a woman resigned to survival. But the woman standing here now wasn't just surviving. She was fighting, creating, changing the world one stubborn conversation at a time. And she wasn't doing it alone. "I love you," she said to Adrian, because those words still felt important every time she spoke them. "I love you too," he replied. "Ready to face tomorrow?" "Always." They turned from the window, hands linked, and walked back into their home, their partnership, their revolution. Outside, rain began to fall, but inside Blackthorn Manor, there was warmth and light, and the sound of two people who'd chosen each other laughing about something inconsequential while they planned how to dismantle the next piece of an unjust world. It wasn't the ending anyone had predicted on their wedding day. It was better.